Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I want to welcome you to this class. And our course is Philosophy of Science in Economics. So this is a course on the PhD program in Energy Economics. Ladies and gentlemen, you recall that before we closed, we had gone through a number of issues. I introduced the course to you. I gave you a course outline. I did indicate the books that you need to read. In fact, I gave you those books, if you recall. And I know that you've been reading these books ever since we broke off. And these books have been very, 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 very enriching and supplementing the material that you gained in class. Now, we had covered a number of things for a period of about 2 months, and I just want to continue with some of the things that we are supposed to continue with. So today, in our lecture, I want to handle a subject called knowledge. And therefore, our topic will be the nature of understanding. Now, ladies and gentlemen, in this lecture, I will highlight the things that we are going to cover. I'll give you an introduction. I'll take you through the concept of knowledge. I'll then take you to another level of reality, the nature of reality, and I will demonstrate to you that reality can also be an illusion. And then I'll also demonstrate to you how reality is experienced. I'll take you to another level of concepts that I call the building blocks of understanding, and then later on look at the conceptual systems, that is the basis for a deeper understanding of the subject. So those are the things that we are going to cover, ladies and gentlemen, in this class or in this lecture. So let me just remind you a few things that we covered. I told you that as PhD students, you join a group of scholars, and that group that you join is interested and continues to gain interest and to pursue that interest in terms of knowledge creation. Therefore, the creation of knowledge is our major and sole purpose at this level. So the nature and the interest of business scholars is to try and create knowledge. So in this area, therefore, ladies and gentlemen, we attempt to understand ourselves. We want to know who we are. We attempt to understand the world around us. And that's why we are engaged in the philosophy of science. We understand the world around us and then try to live a meaningful life. So, in that case, in an attempt to understand what is around us and understand ourselves, we extend our understanding and determine if our understanding is correct and useful, and then make sense of and cope with that particular world. And if you recall, I did give you what previous philosophers developed for us, the works of Aristotle, the works of Socrates, and Plato, you remember very well. The unexamined life is not worth living. So here we deal with issues that lead us into scientific inquiry, scientific research, where we strive to operate according to a more rigorous set of rules. And then researchers, at the end of the day, need to make a contribution to literature. But remember, the work we do must have a philosophical bearing. So, why don't we then define research, since we are getting into philosophy of science, because we shall attempt to relate these things as time goes on. So it was about 2,500 years ago that Socrates spoke the words, "The unexamined life is not worth living." Now this means a scholarly inquiry or examination, especially a critical investigation or experimentation having for its aim the discovery of new facts and their correct interpretation and the revisions of accepted conclusions, theories, and laws in the light of new discovery of facts or the practical application of such conclusions or theories or laws becomes very critical, and therefore they constitute that scientific element of research or scientific inquiry. So, ladies and gentlemen, since we are dealing with knowledge and we are trying to discover knowledge, in this lecture I explore knowledge and the nature of understanding, relying on informal, everyday examples of human thought. And at the end of the day, we want to draw parallels to scientific perceptions of understanding. And in so doing, we build on the works of Albert Einstein, who made an assertion that the whole of science is nothing more than an extension of everyday thinking. And do not forget that. Those were the words of Albert Einstein. The whole of science is nothing more than an extension of everyday thinking. So, what is knowledge, ladies and gentlemen? Knowledge and its transmission is a central concern of researchers. We are interested in creating knowledge. We are interested in disseminating that knowledge. Therefore, the nature of knowledge has been a central concern in philosophy from the earliest times. And that's why we talk about the theory of knowledge. So the theory of knowledge has been constructed as a branch of philosophy known as epistemology. So when we talk about epistemology, we deal with the theory of knowledge. Remember, as researchers, we engage in knowledge creation on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, and so forth. So, epistemology, as we know it, comes from two Greek words. The first word is epistem, meaning knowledge, and two is logos, meaning discourse or science. So, epistemology comes from a Greek word, or two Greek words, epistem and logos. Therefore, epistemology, ladies and gentlemen, is concerned with the nature and the justification of human knowledge. So we are concerned with the nature of knowledge. What is the nature of knowledge? Right. And then we go into justification of knowledge. And I'm sure you remember our definition of knowledge. Knowledge is defined as justified true beliefs. Right, so the issue of justification comes in there. The issue of beliefs comes in there. And of course, you have the issue of truth coming in there. Therefore, epistemology is concerned with the nature and justification of human knowledge, and it investigates the origin, nature of knowledge, methods, validity, and limits of knowledge. And those are major issues in the area of the theory of knowledge, which is actually epistemology. So epistemology is concerned with the nature and justification of knowledge. I've just told you that. So Epistemologists then have concerned with themselves a number of issues, right? And they try to and attempt to answer a number of questions. For example, one of the questions they attempt to answer is, what is knowledge? The second question they will try to answer is knowledge one or many? Can you talk about knowledge as a body of knowledge? Or you can talk about knowledge in terms of many. So you're talking about bodies here. So what is the structure of knowledge? And what are the logical categories of knowledge? Those are questions that epistemologists attempt to answer, ladies and gentlemen. And I've already told you that according to the most widely accepted definition, knowledge is justified through belief. For example, if the sun rises in the east, right, is the knowledge or true belief, right? And we know that, and we've been told over the years, that actually the sun rises in the east. And that's the knowledge, or what we consider to be the true belief. Now, that is supported by the fact which is arrived through daily observations for millions of years. So every day you see that happening, and many people have been seeing it. And that is really justification. So we can be said to have knowledge only of what is true, right? So the issue of truth comes in there. Now, if one admits that a proposition P is false, it must be admitted that the person did not know it, right? Now, knowledge is expressed in propositions. And ladies and gentlemen, a proposition is a meaningful sentence that conveys truth or meaning. Do not forget that. A proposition, ladies and gentlemen, is a meaningful sentence that conveys truth or meaning. And remember, right, we can be said to have knowledge only of what is true, right? And knowledge can be expressed in terms of propositions, ladies and gentlemen. And this is very important for us because propositions do tell us something that we believe at the end of the day. Now, for a sentence to be meaningful, the words in a sentence should be meaningful. The concepts expressed in the form of words should be true. The concepts should correspond to the state of affairs that is existing at present or existed once upon a time, ladies and gentlemen. So we use sentences to assert something, express proposition. We use sentences to assert something, express proposition. So we express the propositions in terms of those sentences. So the sentences will be there. Now, according to John Hospers, ladies and gentlemen, there are two requirements for knowing. One is what we call an objective requirement. And that objective requirement can again be presented in terms of proposition. So P must be true. That's the objective requirement. And of course, knowing P is knowing P to be true, right? So we are talking about truth. Remember, knowledge is justified through belief. Now, the second aspect or a second requirement for knowing is a subjective one. Remember, we have an objective one. Knowing P is knowing P to be true. The subjective one is that one must believe P. For example, if I know that the sun rises in the east, right, and that's what you've been seeing over the years, it actually implies that I believe in it. And that's why I'm saying the sun rises, right, in the east, and therefore I will believe that proposition. So that's the subjective one. It comes from belief, and that's why knowledge is defined, right? Knowledge is defined. Knowledge is defined, and I hope you still remember that definition. Justified true beliefs. Justification, beliefs, and truth. Justified true beliefs. Right, so that's why a definition of knowledge, or that aspect of knowing, will have two perspectives: the subjective requirement and the objective requirement. Now, of course, we add another component, right? And that is the necessity of evidence or reason to believe P. So you must provide a reason to me so that I believe what you want me to believe. For example, I know that the sun will rise tomorrow, right? And I know that ice, for instance, melts on heating, and these have excellent reasons or evidences to believe them to be true because of their certainty. So I know that the sun will rise tomorrow, right? And that is possibly somebody must observe the following day to see whether the sun rises. But if the sun does not rise, you won't have evidence for you to prove that actually the sun rises from the east. And I must be able to say that. If you say that ice, for instance, melts on heating, there must be evidence. In other words, when you carry out an experiment and you hit that ice, ice must melt. And if ice doesn't melt, then there will be something wrong with it. So, ladies and gentlemen, let me give you sound reasons of knowledge, right? And these are justifications for calling something knowledge, right? Remember, knowledge is justified through beliefs. So we must have justification, right? And then truth, and then belief. So, in other words, you must have sound reasons for knowledge. So one of the sound reasons for knowledge is perception. Right, a belief, a perception is a belief or an opinion, often held by many people and based on how things seem, right? So people have perceptions about certain things, and these are beliefs, they have opinions. So sometimes when they have opinions and beliefs, they make you believe and think that that is knowledge, but those are their beliefs, ladies and gentlemen. The second aspect is self-awareness, and self-awareness is conscious knowledge of one's own character and feelings, right? And that is self-awareness. The other one is the deductive approach or deduction. And under deduction, it's making conclusions based on premises that are known to be true. That is deduction. The other aspect is induction, ladies and gentlemen. Induction, that is claiming knowledge about the future events based on past experiences. So you can't use your past experiences to claim knowledge, right? So those are some of the sound reasons for justification, sound reasons for knowledge. So justifications for calling something knowledge, right, can also stem from other things like authority, consensus, gentium, that is basing knowledge on the fact that everybody, or at least most people, agree that something is knowledge. I mean, if you always interact with certain individuals and they believe that is correct, you may also end up believing, and that's what you call consensus, right? And of course, intuition is another form, revelation is another one, faith is also another aspect of it. So I want to invite you, especially since we are discussing issues of knowledge, sound reasons of knowledge, go and read the works of Aquinas on faith and how faith can be used as sound reason for knowledge. And there is a debate, of course, in the books that have been written over the years. Right, so ladies and gentlemen, allow me then to draw some bit of parallels here before I take you to another level, right? So remember, we are dealing with the knowledge, and with the knowledge we deal with the issues of ontology, we deal with the issues of epistemology, and we deal with the issues of archaeology, issues of methodology and issues of rhetorical assumptions and so forth, ladies and gentlemen. Now, briefly, I can tell you what ontological assumptions are. And ontological assumptions are assumptions about reality, about the nature of reality. So we ask ourselves, what is the nature of reality? Now, the issue is there is a reality that can be apprehended, right? And individuals believe reality exists out there, but then we attempt to understand that reality. We can determine the way things are and often discover the cause-effect relationship behind the social reality. And at the least, we can find meaningful indicators of what is really happening. So ontology deals with reality, the nature of reality, and reality can be socially constructed. And there are so many constructions about this reality, ladies and gentlemen. Now, when we go to epistemology, epistemological assumptions are very important, because here we ask ourselves questions how the researcher comes to know that reality. Now, the investigator and the object of investigation are independent from each other, and the object can be researched without being influenced by the researcher. And of course, these are major issues. Epistemology deals with the issue of knowledge, right? What is that knowledge? How do we construct knowledge? And we shall be looking at those aspects in detail. Now, when we deal with another aspect of axiology, axiological assumptions, we look at values, right, which are excluded from the research process, and they are considered to be confounding variables, phenomena that cloud our view of reality. So we want to understand reality, but there are those things that may cloud our understanding or our view of reality. And then we go into what we call methodological assumptions, how the researcher accesses and reports what is learned about the reality. The most prevalent methods in this case which are used may include things like experiments, the quasi-experiments, and other hypothesis testing techniques. So I think, again, we shall go through those things. And we need to understand these concepts very well. Now, one of the things we should not forget at this level is that as we attempt to understand and to construct reality, we have what we call rhetorical assumptions that come into play. Now, in this, at this level, the level of rhetoric, the research is written from the perspective of disinterested scientists, and therefore we must ensure that the researchers and the community and the disinterested scientists actually pick interest in the research that we do. Right, so having said that, I want to tell you, ladies and gentlemen, that for instance, when you are dealing with the issues of ontology, you may have a positivistic or a conventional perspective of ontology, and ontology dealing with the nature of reality. And then you can also have constructivist kind of thinking, right? Now, if you look at this nature of reality, right, if you have a positivist or a conventional mind, here you will develop a feeling, and that will be your interpretation and perspective that reality is tangible. Reality exists outside me. Reality is objective and can be broken down into parts, right? And of course, here you will say truth exists and can be apprehended and measured. And that is really a positivistic or the conventional perspective of ontology or nature of reality. But you can also have the constructivist perspective of ontology. And here, there is a general belief that reality is constructed, reality is subjective, reality is multiple, reality is relative, and therefore constructions are probably not more or less true, only more or less informed in this case. So that is in as far as ontology is concerned. So why don't we go to epistemology now, which is the nature of knowledge? What are those positivist or the conventional and the constructivist perspectives here? Remember, we are dealing with knowledge, right? And our objective is to construct knowledge. So the reality exists out there, but then we need to construct knowledge about that reality. So in terms of the positivist or the conventional perspective of epistemology, here the knower and the known are independent of each other. The influence of the researcher on the researched can be controlled, and the replicable findings are true. That is the positivistic or the positivist or the conventional way of looking at epistemology. Now, the constructivist perspective of epistemology here is that the knower and the known are interactively linked. Findings are created as research proceeds. Remember, you are dealing with a constructivist approach or perspective. How about axiology, the role of values, right? So when does axiology take on the positivist perspective? This happens if inquiry is objective and thus value-free. If values and biases can be eliminated through the use of rigorous procedures, that would be fantastic. And of course, when we take the constructivist perspective of axiology, inquiry is value-bound, ladies and gentlemen. Values are inherent in the context of the study. The researcher's values affect the study. So that's why when we undertake research, ladies and gentlemen, we are always confronted with those three perspectives. I'll take it to another level. But you say ontology is there. So you must understand the ontological perspectives of your study. You must understand the epistemological foundations of your study, and these are knowledge-driven. And then the axiological perspective, because at the end of the day, whatever method that we choose to use, we want to eliminate bias. We do not want bias in whatever we do, and therefore that becomes very important, ladies and gentlemen. So we can now go to the nature of reality, right? Ladies and gentlemen, much philosophical thought has been devoted to the question of the nature of reality. And there is controversy among scientists about whether a single objective reality could ever be shown to exist. And according to realism, reality exists independent of any human presence. Therefore, there is an external world comprised of objects that follow a myriad of natural facts and laws. And therefore, we need to understand those things very well. So, that is if you take the realism or the realistic sort of perspective. But you can also have the social construction perspective. Now, social construction perspective, ladies and gentlemen, the proponents of these, they do hold that reality is constructed of the human mind. Remember, that reality is a construction of the human mind. That this construction is tied to a particular time and social context. And what is considered reality changes as the social context changes. I don't know whether you are getting what I'm saying, ladies and gentlemen. There is the social construction perspective. And under the social construction perspective, reality is a construction of the human mind, right? And this construction of the human mind, ladies and gentlemen, is tied to a particular time and social context. So there's a time element and there's a social context perspective. And therefore, in this case, what is considered to be reality will change as the social context changes, ladies and gentlemen. So that's why there's a general belief that reality is socially constructed. Now, in its most extreme form, ladies and gentlemen, constructionism maintains that there is no reality, right? And there are no facts until these are conceptualized and shared by some member or members of a particular community or society. There are no facts until these facts are conceptualized and shared by some number of people in a particular society or a community, and that is what we call the extreme form of constructionism. And that's what they maintain. Now, there is a moderate position, ladies and gentlemen, and this moderate position holds that though there is an external reality independent of humankind, we can never know its units and true laws, or even if it has units and true laws. Right? That even if this exists, right, reality exists, external reality exists, and exists independent of humankind, it is very hard to know the units and the true laws that constitute that reality, ladies and gentlemen. All we can know is our interpretation and the construction of those experiences, ladies and gentlemen. So, why don't we continue with our discussion dealing with the nature of reality? There is an example that I gave you, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you still remember, in class, and I just want to remind you so that you understand this reality. Right, I did tell you in class that you see sometimes what you see and what you interpret may even depend on the distance, right? It may depend on a number of things. I mean, for example, I am seated here, right? If you are seated 1 meter from me, another person is seated about 5 meters from me, another one is standing around 10 meters from me, and I ask you to describe and interpret what you are seeing, you will see different things, right? If, for instance, I ask you to describe this bottle, and you are here, you will say, well, we see that is Renzori mineral water. Another fellow is about 2 kilometers away, or 1 kilometer, or 500 meters away, may see something, but not necessarily this. So the description will be totally different. Right, I can give another example. I can ask you to draw 2 parallel lines on your piece of paper or on your board, ladies and gentlemen. Now, and if I ask you to describe what you are seeing, you're going to give me different answers. Some people will see a road, right? They will say, oh, this is a road. Other people will see 2 lines, and they'll say, these are 2 lines, right? Now, if, for instance, I give you a hint and I say, well, look at those 2 parallel lines which you have drawn, but I'm giving you a hint. It's a number. I can tell you I'll get interpretations. Many interpretations will emerge. Somebody will say it's an Arabic number 2. Right, Arabic number 2. Others will say, no, it is Roman numeral 2. Right. Another one will say, no, it is a binary number 3. Do you see the interpretations? The reality, right, we are observing can be given different interpretations depending on the lenses that you hold in your minds, depending on the experiences that you've gone through over the years. So each of those responses, ladies and gentlemen, represents a different but potentially accurate reconstruction of the same objective reality. And that will reflect the individual's mental perspective. And therefore, you cannot sit down and say, this one is right, this one is wrong. No. And that's what happens in research. We attempt to understand reality, but we have different lenses that we are using. And that's why in our attempt to understand reality, somebody may use a theological lens to examine that concept. Another fellow may use a psychological lens to examine the same reality. Another one may actually use an economic lens. Another one may use a chemistry lens, and so forth, and so forth. So the interpretations will certainly vary depending on the lenses and the experiences that we have gone through in life. Now, the way in which reality is interpreted can vary within the individual over time, right, across individuals over time, and can be heavily influenced by context. Right. Now, someone immersed in the study of Roman antiquity, for example, is likely to interpret the two parallel lines that I gave you as representing Roman numeral 2. Right. And I've already said that. Now, every individual develops his or her own reality. So we are not in the same. We may not share the same reality, right? Although, as I said earlier on, you can use consensus as one way of knowing. Remember, knowledge is justified through beliefs, right? So, but we have a number of different realities which could be constructed out in different ways, and of course, looking at those issues differently, ladies and gentlemen. So, as you can see, there's a possibility, and that's why in research we need to be very careful, and also to respect other scholars because they have views, right? Do not always attempt to enforce your views to the extent that you can even fight about what you think is correct. No, we can't have the same perspective and interpretation of reality. It is not possible. Now, if we go back to realism, ladies and gentlemen, the realism perspective holds that conceptual systems and theories are created so as to precisely mirror an existing reality. And that is realism. Right, we are dealing with reality. So can we, for instance, develop conceptual systems? Can we develop theories, right, which can precisely mirror an existing reality? Right. So for some of you who probably are just getting into this area, and the area is a little bit new to you, I did tell you something in our previous classes, if you recall, especially when we are discussing issues relating to a theory. I know you can have a very complicated definition for what a theory is, and I know there are so many definitions as there are writers on the subject of a theory. But I want to tell you, ladies and gentlemen, right, that a theory is a very simple thing, for instance, right? A theory can be seen and defined as a net, right, that you cast out there in the wider environment to capture that reality. And that's why these scholars in realism, right, they do hold that conceptual systems and theories are created so as to precisely mirror an existing reality. And therefore, the outcomes of the assessment processes can be taken as direct representations of that reality, and it is possible to make claims regarding ultimate truth. Right. Remember, we are dealing with knowledge, ladies and gentlemen. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you for attending this lecture. It was meant to be very short and sort of an introduction and a reminder and a recap of some of the things that we have covered in class. I will be coming back and we'll be meeting next week. And next week, in our next lecture, I'll be dealing with this thing called reality. Can we attempt to understand what reality is? So I'll take you back to the works of Albert Einstein, and that's where we shall start to trying to understand the concept of reality. So ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for attending this lecture. Remember, these are the lectures we are having in the series of Philosophy of Science. And since you are doing energy economics, sooner or later I'll be taking you into those perspectives of economics, but looking at philosophy as applied to economics. So stay well, stay home, stay well. I wish you a very nice time. Let's meet in our next lecture. Thank you very much.